Hello, my name is Aaron Packard. I'm the curator of Pacific Bonsai Museum, and today we're going to be looking at the end of World War II and the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and how these events influenced and shaped bonsai practice in Japan as well as around the world. World War II brought immense hardships on all the countries that were involved in it, but specifically in Japan, the resources that were being funneled to the war effort really meant that things like bonsai were viewed as unnecessary and superfluous to the war effort. And so during the war, bonsai activities in Japan also virtually stopped as nurseries that cultivated bonsai were directed to begin growing vegetables. So instead of being bonsai, it became almost like a victory garden. So no new bonsai were being created, and these bonsai teachers then were losing their apprentices to the draft, who were being then brought in to serve and fight in the various theaters of war. And so we really see many bonsai nurseries in Japan being shut down altogether. There are a few exceptions, but if you even practice bonsai in Japan, you were viewed as unpatriotic because things like water and your time should be going into supporting the country's efforts in the war. And so one individual, though, was exempt from this mandate. His name was Kyuzo Murata, and he had a bonsai garden outside of Tokyo. And the reason he was allowed to continue to operate it was due to his connections to the government. He was the caretaker for the Imperial Bonsai Collection at the Imperial Palace. And so because of that connection, he was allowed to still take care of the trees at the palace and then also maintain and run his own nursery. But even with that sort of ability, he still had a really hard time, as the use of water for firefighting was really essential at the end of the war, as the Allies got closer and firebombing became kind of the standard protocol for sort of attacking Japan. These firestorms would start in parts of the city, and the ability to firefight was essential. So even watering the bonsai became a challenge. Even at the Imperial Collection, he would talk about having to go and sneak down to the moat that surrounds the palace to get water and carry it back to the trees. The moat was even guarded by soldiers so that no one could access that water for any other purpose but firefighting. But that commitment to bonsai is not unique to Murata. Everyone who participates and practices bonsai has a really strong connection to their trees, and the lengths that we would go to care for them is extreme. And I think this is just a wonderful example of that, especially during the war. Murata's nursery was also eventually on the brink of collapse, though, with no practitioners. He couldn't sell trees with no real resources. He couldn't further run his business without a change that occurred. And so eventually, as the war wound down, he was about to close his nursery, and a military car, an Allied military vehicle, rolled in front of his nursery, and two U.S. military servicemen got out and had wanted to see his garden. They had heard about this collection of miniature trees outside of Tokyo, and after showing them around for a few hours, and he asked them to sign his guest book, which he had not opened in over 4 years, and they signed it and left, and he had the inscriptions translated. And in reading them, those comments left by these Allied soldiers really encouraged him to continue in his work. The tone of them was of appreciation and a sense of sort of understanding that they were able to see and sort of value those trees was really encouraging. And the emergence of more soldiers coming to his garden really sort of changed, and we see that as more and more servicemen were stationed in Japan after the war, the interest in bonsai really exploded. The bonsai village of Omiya became kind of the epicenter for servicemen going to sort of tour and see these trees. And one of the other nurseries at the time that had weathered the War was belonged to a gentleman named Yuji Yoshimura, and he was in his early 30s. He was the son of a bonsai master, and so it was sort of his family's business he was continuing. He had also served in the Japanese military during World War II and had come back and started his own nursery. He saw the opportunity and the interest there and began teaching Allied occupation forces who were wanting bonsai information, and was the first to actually teach bonsai in English in Japan. His first course was in 1952, and within a few years, he had taught over 600 students. Most of them were diplomats or servicemen, their spouses, businessmen coming into the country who wanted to learn bonsai. And this really is the turning point for bonsai in sort of the global sense, because that interaction and that interest sparked by the close proximity brought about by the end of the war and the Allied occupation, we see that the soldiers brought back that fascination and that interest in bonsai to their home state. So here in the U.S., the various clubs around the country, specifically in California and Colorado, and even back east, started to be formed as more and more people started to get interested in bonsai. And so we can sort of credit those two gentlemen specifically, Yuji Yoshimura and Kyuzo Murata, with really preserving bonsai through the war and then sharing it with others following the end of World War II. Another individual with a really amazing story in relationship to the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and bonsai is a gentleman named Ben Oki. Ben Oki was born in Sacramento, California in 1927, and when he was 6 years old, he and his family returned to Japan, settling in Hiroshima. As the war began to break out in Japan, the family tried to return to the U.S. but were unsuccessful. And Ben had to find some type of work to help contribute to the family. He found himself on a cargo ship as a purser who was responsible for taking supplies from Japan to the Philippine Islands in support of the military efforts that were going on there. On one of these voyages, Ben's ship was attacked by U.S. aircraft and was sunk, and he survived the attack as well as being adrift at sea for several days until a Japanese naval vessel responded and rescued him. He returned to Hiroshima, and on the morning of August 6th, 1945, was waiting for a train with his younger brother, Henry, to take them into downtown Hiroshima. His younger brother was going to school, as he did every day. He was known to be a very dedicated student, never missing school. Ben was going to have a job interview for understandable reasons, wanting a new line of work with the Japanese government. And just as he was about to board the train, he decided instead to take his friend up on an offer to go fishing. And so walked away from the platform, met up with his friend, and they went fishing instead of him going into the city. His younger brother went to school, got on the train, and that was the last time that Ben saw his brother. Ben and his friend fished. They sort of had finished for the morning. They were pulling their boat up out of the water, up under a grove of bamboo into the shade, and they noticed the silver kind of reflection of an aircraft flying over the city in the distance, and shortly after heard the explosion and felt the sonic blast, most likely also seeing the flash and the mushroom cloud sort of rising above the city. Following the war, Ben was able to return to the States in 1950. He settled in Los Angeles and began a career as a gardener, eventually starting his own landscape design company, which specialized in creating and installing Japanese gardens around the country. As a member of the Japanese American community in LA, he got connected to a group who were practicing bonsai. One of those individuals was the up-and-coming bonsai star, John Naka. And upon that meeting, Ben's interest in bonsai began. Very quickly, Ben and John formed a very strong partnership, and John, as he began traveling around the globe, would take Ben with him. In his introductions, he would always introduce Ben as his right hand. And through that relationship, Ben also became established as a very skilled and knowledgeable instructor. As a result of his notoriety and skill as a bonsai instructor and as a landscape designer, he was invited to be the first curator of the bonsai collection at the Huntington Library and Gardens in San Marino, California, where he served as the curator until he was 88 years old. Unfortunately, Ben passed away in 2018, but we are extremely thankful and proud to say that we have a bonsai from Mr. Oki in our collection here. It's this tree to my right. It's a really unique tree. It has its own story just as much as Ben did. And this tree was growing in his front yard in Los Angeles. It's a Chinese hackberry, and the tree eventually got up to about 20 feet tall and began to damage his roof. He was needing to remove it to repair it, and before he did so, he thought he could turn it into a bonsai. And in the world of bonsai, this process of sort of cutting a tree down to a stump is fairly common. Usually somewhere between 4 and 6 inches above the ground, you can cut the tree at the base as long as it's a deciduous tree, and then you'll get new sprouts emerging from that cut site. So over the next 50 years, this tree has sort of been cultivated through that process, originally started by Ben, and sort of we can see the evidence of that cut stump, which he then sort of carved out to create this hollow in the trunk and this really beautiful branch structure as a result of decades of dedicated care and maintenance. So we are really grateful and honored to have a tree from Ben Oki in our collection. It just stands as a reminder of him and his contributions to the bonsai community here in the United States, and really even reaches back into the war years and to understand how lucky he was, how fortunate we are today that he survived the war, came to the U.S., got involved in bonsai, and this tree is a result of that. And so we're continuing to steward that in honor of him, and are very grateful for that opportunity.